Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen who are joining us for today's webinar on QMS and Hasseb food systems. So today we'll be talking more on Hasseb for very good reasons, because we know that is the key point that a lot of us as producers of food products really would want to get our act in shape and make sure we are up and ready for everything that comes with it. Yes, we all know the benefits of Hasseb. I mean, as they say, it avoids poisoning your customers. You are able to implement good food safety standards. You increase your compliance with the law, and you will not default, and then due diligence would also be followed. This is just a little to preempt our curiosity and our appetite for the very detailed discussions that our expert on quality would be taking us through. Today, our main man who will take us through the presentation is our quality expert, Frederick Jamra. I think he's a familiar face since lockdown in terms of quality standards, and he's been doing justice to these topics over the past few weeks. We wait for a few others to join, maybe a minute more, and then we can really dip into the deep. On behalf of the WACOMP team, I want to welcome all of you to today's webinar again. We're talking, as I said, we're talking about the QMS and then Hasseb food systems. But upon further reflections, we'll focus mainly on the Hasseb system. And then hopefully next week, we would now talk about the quality management systems and the benefits of the ISO, so that we know what benefits to derive and how to implement this. This webinar is being presented to you or being hosted by the West Africa Competitiveness Program, WACOMP. It's a familiar face and a familiar name by now. It's a project that is funded by the European Union, financed, and then implemented in Ghana by UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. We're working on 3 main value chains, as we are all aware, on cassava and derivatives, fruits, mango, pineapple, and cosmetics and personal care products. And this is one of the several series of webinars that we organize. So without keeping members who have signed up early waiting, I would now hand over to Fred Jamna, who will take us through the presentations. I would also want to invite all of you that we'll have a very quick poll, and then within the poll, we'll just we'll gauge our ideas about what we know about the Hasseb and all the ideas. Then from there, Fred will kickstart. So my colleague Ibe, who is hiding behind the cameras, Ibe, can you please load the poll for us? And we'll entreat everybody to do that. So how much do you know about ISO 9000 quality management systems? Have you already tried to apply the ISO 9000 in your business? Yeah, 19 so far, so we're still waiting for others to, let's have our votes. Let's vote, and then let's give Fred an indication as to what to talk about as he delves into the Hasseb issues. So about half of us have done justice to it. We're waiting for the other half to help us out, and then we can move on. Whilst we wait for the other half, for all those who've joined us, we say a very warm welcome to you, and we hope you enjoy your stay with us. As I've already indicated, next week, Friday, we will be here again talking about the quality management principles and benefits associated with the ISO. But today, as I've already indicated, we're doing everything on Hasseb. We want to know Hasseb and what to do to implement the Hasseb principles. Yes, so we have 5 more people. I think we will be giving the results any moment from now. And then it gives us a good idea what to do. Good. So, Mr. Jamra, this is what you see, as they say, this is how far we have come. How much do you know about ISO 9000 quality management systems? I mean, nothing. I think a majority of us do not know a lot. Have you already tried applying ISO in your business? A overwhelming majority also say no. So our work is cut out for us. Thank you very much, Ibe. And so at this point, we'll hand over to Fred. Before we kickstart, I'll please entreat you for the chat, but for the Q&A button. Please, any question you have, as he starts, please keep your questions flowing. Once he's done with the presentations, we'll have ample time to take all questions that's bothering us. So please, as he kickstarts, if you have any question, let it flow in the Q&A button, and then we'll be able to take it up and have a discussions on that. On that note, Fred, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this webinar. We are going to discuss Hasseb food safety system. Just try to give an overview, which more or less will try to give us an idea if we decide to implement Hasseb in our operations. The details may not be enough for you now, but as we start, we try to give you almost all that you need to ensure that you have a system that is feasible and that is workable, and you'll be able to derive the maximum benefits from the implementation of Hasseb. So for now, let's look at the overview and how we can incorporate that in our operation. So let's look at the content of our discussion today. We'll try to give you some few words by way of introduction. Then you focus on what Hasseb is all about. This is the hazard analysis critical control point. Our last seminar, we tried to explain the term Hasseb and what it entails. Today, you go a bit further by giving you the foundation of that system by way of trying to explain the PRPs, that is the prerequisite programs, and then focus mainly on the principles of Hasseb. I will not leave you there. I'll walk you through the implementation of Hasseb. So if nothing at all, you go home with some ideas on Hasseb and how to implement it. Hasseb was developed originally as a microbiological safety system in the early days, that is in the 1960s. And it was used by NASA purposely to prepare their space programs, as it was vital to ensure the safety of foods for their astronauts. Now, we'll be mentioning hazard, their occupational hazard, and their food hazard, their business hazard. But once you are talking about food systems, our hazard is defined as a biological, chemical, or physical agent or contaminant, or anything that we may find undesirable in food, which has the potential to cause adverse health effect, that is, cause illness. It was based on the principle that hazards are affecting food systems that can be either eliminated or minimized by prevention during production rather than by inspection of the finished product. It's a proactive system, and therefore I will encourage every producer to embrace the concept of Hasseb as the baseline for its food safety program. The goal, the main goal, is to prevent hazard at the earliest possible point in your food operations. You can apply this principle right from the harvest to the point of consumption. Now let's try to define the abbreviation HACCP. Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. This system is very equivalent to, if you like, synonymous with food safety management. It is the most fundamental food safety management system. There are other versions of food safety management system, but all in all, they are all based on the same principle, prevention, right from the beginning of the supply chain. It is a system which identifies, go further to evaluate what they have identified and try to come out with control that will prevent the significant hazard for causing harm to the consumer. It gives confidence that the food safety programs or system is being managed effectively. So one of the benefits, it will give the consumer that confidence that what is consuming is safe, it is wholesome, it is not harmful, it's not going to cause adverse health effects. So we are saying in the nutshell that it looks for hazards or anything that would go wrong regarding product safety. And implements control subsequently to ensure that the product will not cause harm to the consumer. So it's a very important tool. So the question is, why do you want to encourage you to have a HACCP system? Consumers expect that the food product they purchase, and if you like consume, is subject to proper preparation, storage, and handling. In other words, whatever you come out with is safe for consumption. So when you go to FDA, they'll say whether your product is wholesome. All they are saying is that whether it is safe for consumption, both human and animal consumption. You all know that food safety hazard can be introduced at any stage of the food supply chain. Any stage at all. Why are you saying this? You are talking about contaminants. And once you mention contaminant, unintentional, and therefore, you should put in place adequate controls throughout the food chain so that you will not, at the end of the production, contaminate or render your food unwholesome or unsafe for consumption. The analysis is key to the identification of the control measures, because if you are not able to identify the potential cause of that ill effect, it will be very difficult for you to propose any control measure. And this is part and parcel of your food safety management system. So you identify the hazard, evaluate it, and come out with very effective and efficient way of controlling the hazard. So you will mention hazard and you will mention critical control point. And that's what we put together to give you that acronym HACCP. So hazard, as used in the system, the food safety system, I've mentioned already, it could be biological, chemical, or physical agent. And now science has taught us that even allergens to be part of that hazard that may be associated with food systems. And this hazard has the potential to cause harm, illness. Now, what is a critical control point? In most of the old versions of food safety or food science document, you talk about a step. But science has taught us it's not only a step. It could be a phase, it could be a stage in your production systems at which controls can be applied. Please, this is very, very important. In the American system, you have the CCP, which is a critical control point, and you have what? Control points. They try to distinguish between critical control point and control point. Okay? So critical in the sense that at that step, you should apply the preventive measure to prevent or eliminate the food safety hazard. And in practice, it is difficult for you to eliminate it. So you try to say that you will try to bring it to acceptable level. Bring it or reduce it to an acceptable level. The question is that how do we determine the acceptable level? That is why in Hasseb system, once you've done the identification evaluation and been able to pinpoint the critical points, you will come out with what is called the value, the critical value, the limits, the acceptable limit. And that is why we say reduce it to an acceptable level. So we are talking about you try to eliminate or minimize it by prevention during the production, rather than by inspection at the end of the production. That is inspection of finished product. In the higher standards of food safety system, you don't even want to talk about inspection because, I mean, it's a postmortem. The problem has already been created and is part and parcel of the output. So to avoid rework and wastage, you try to identify this, prevent it during the production stages, rather than to wait and do inspection of the finished product. That is why now the emphasis is on quality assurance unit rather than quality control, because of the function of HACCP system. So you prevent hazard at the earliest possible point in the food chain. That is why we said it starts from the beginning of the supply chain, right from the production, the primary production stage, through to the value addition. That's where you do the manufacturing or the production itself, and then you pass it on to the final stage that is ready for consumption. So from harvest to the point of consumption. So adding HACCP to your traditional inspection and quality control activities that you all know of, you would be able to put in place a preventive quality assurance system. Please, the focus is now on a preventive quality assurance system. Quality assurance in the sense that you can anticipate where the problems will come, and you can come out, design, or formulate a very comprehensive and effective control system. So if you are using HACCP system, then the possibility is that you'll be able to prevent the HACCP right from the beginning, and therefore you'll be able to protect or come out with a product that will be safe for consumption. Now let's see if we can apply HACCP to whatever you are doing. Once you are processing food, okay, there is a way that you can introduce this HACCP concept or system. What are you talking about? You establish a way of operating, including the methods of the full food processing or manufacturing, and then the handling. So it's the whole chain. We know, most of us, the traditional way of production is what is comfortable for us. So when you introduce the HACCP system, that element of change, you all have the tendency to resist change. Why do we say so? HACCP requires fundamental change in the culture or the attitude of the food operators. Fundamental change in the culture or attitude. What are some of these? Everything is in our head. You don't want to document it. You can just narrate it, describe it, whatever, but you do not want to document it. That change, that attitude must change. So we write things down so that even if you are not available, around, physically available, your staff or whoever subordinate will be in a position to read and do exactly the same thing that you've been doing. So that attitudinal change is very critical if you want to succeed by way of applying HACCP in your food manufacturing operation. You're talking about using procedures and documenting them. But if you are not able to do that and you want to remain unchanged, then I'm afraid it will be very difficult for you to implement this HACCP food safety system effectively. The concept of risk-based food safety control may be difficult because you are adamant. You don't want to change. You want to remain the way you do things. And that will be very difficult because now the focus is not only on the so-called pre-specified physical parameters like temperature, moisture, and things like that. But now you want to look at some of the microbial contamination, which is the risk-based aspect of the food safety system. And I mentioned earlier, even allergy could pose a problem to the consumer. Now, I'm saying that it is very important for the staff working in your company to understand the HACCP system. They should buy in. If they understand, obviously they will buy into the concept. And therefore, they will be in the position to maintain it. So you can establish it because it's fanciful, everybody's doing it. But if they do not understand the HACCP system and they do not buy into the system, it will be very difficult for them to maintain it. So it shouldn't be like you're adopting the HACCP simply to satisfy the regulatory requirement because let's say FDA is coming. If you apply for registration and therefore they are coming to inspect your system and you quickly implement HACCP just to please them, satisfy the regulatory requirement. If that is the motion, that is the rationale, I'm afraid you will fail because of lack of commitment, buy-in by the technical staff. So, therefore, WACOMP, WACOMP, Ghana, is trying to support value chain operators and companies, especially those desiring to export, to implement or comply with the prerequisite for HACCP implementation and verification. The prerequisite, I'll try to go into deeper details later, but to set up the conditions that you need to establish a very useful Hasseb system, food safety system, and to be able to implement it well, effectively and efficiently to derive the maximum benefit from whatever you've established. So what are the prerequisite programs? PRPs, in short, prerequisite programs. They are the basic conditions and activities that are necessary. Conditions and activities. So the physical structure of your facility and what you do at the various points to maintain a hygienic environment throughout the food chain. So establish the conditions that is suitable for your production, handling, so that at the end of the day, you'll be able to provide safe or wholesome end products. So the first thing is that the foundation, which is the prerequisite program. So whoever says he has implemented the Hasseb must and should have these conditions and activities well established. And this should be suitable for the production, handling, and the provision of wholesome end product. You may have the state-of-the-art production equipment, but the handling activities very unsatisfactory. It will be very difficult for you, or even more challenging, to come out with wholesome products. You may have it once, but that consistency of achieving wholesome product will be absent. So when implemented, PRPs should assist you in controlling the likelihood of introducing food safety hazards. And I've mentioned biological, chemical, physical. And these are contaminants, unwanted elements that you may find in your products. The risk factor, biological, you cannot see with your own eyes. The chemicals, you may not see. The physical contaminants, if you are lucky and very, if you like, meticulous, you may find them. So these prerequisite programs are very, so they will ask you questions like, how do you ensure that your product is not contaminated by microbes, viruses, pathogens? They are not contaminated chemicals, unwanted chemicals. They are not part of your recipe. They are not part, like ingredients that you use to formulate whatever you're producing. So they are unwanted, and we call them contaminants. And even, that's why put in place systems that may reduce it to acceptable levels, especially when it comes to the issue that you cannot eliminate completely, but reduce it to acceptable level. Levels that may not pose problem, and more so, will not contaminate the processing environment. So if you are producing very close to the rubbish dump, a garage, a washing bay, where they are discharging dirty oils or fumes into the environment, your establishment is too close, please fulfill the PRP. The conditions are not good enough for you to come out with wholesome product. The other aspect, the need to be appropriate. These PRPs, activities or conditions, need to be appropriate to the products and the processes. So you cannot copy because you've seen it somewhere and just introduce into your system. They may not be appropriate for that particular product. If you are producing high quality cassava flour, you cannot go and copy the PRPs from somebody who's producing water, mineral water, or pineapple juice, or shea butter cream, body cream, what is very sensitive to the human body. You cannot do that because those conditions, those PRPs may not be appropriate. But there are some generic PRPs that should form the basis for any production or manufacturing setup. So you should know about this and implement the most appropriate PRPs. Now let's talk about some of the PRPs that you need to put in place or need to be established by your company. If you are starting up, it's easy because there are guidelines, documents that will help you put in place the appropriate PRP and associated activities. But if you are already in operation, then you may need to do certain changes, especially in physical infrastructure. You may have the procedures, everything written or not. So you have it. But the system says that document it. Write down your procedures, your policies regarding food safety. So in your prerequisite program, all these things should be documented. If you do not, then your company must establish these basic conditions and activities. For instance, the hygiene protocols, changeover. Before you start work, do you walk into the production area with the clothes that you brought from home, or there's a cloak room where you have to change and put yourself in readiness for the task ahead of you, depending on where you find yourself. So you hear people, food safety experts, talking about dirty and clean areas. Okay? Are you wearing the appropriate PP, the protective clothing, the shoes? Are you appropriately dressed for that purpose? Are the activities physically segregated so that there will not be cross-contamination? How is the product flow? How is the human traffic? Is it one way or two way? Are there hygiene junctions to ensure that you observe the hygiene protocols? Hand washing in food factories started long ago is not because of COVID. COVID has only come to re-emphasize that. It's one way of what? Contaminating. So the prerequisite, the arrangement, there are several of them. So let's look at some of them. For now, layout of your premise. That is a facility. The space, you have adequate space. There's a place crowded, so many employees in a small corner. Have you segregated the various operations, cleaning, cutting, mailing, and all kinds of activities? Are they well segregated? Your suppliers, some use filtered air because their packaging is done in a special way. Are you using potable water? Is your energy supply reliable so that you don't have power fluctuation? You have enough energy if you should keep a cold room. These are some of the things that you need to do. Then you look at the supporting services. You see the tricky aspect of Hasseb. You think supporting service is what? An outsourced activity. Look at it. Waste disposal, sewage, pest control. They may be outsourced activity, but your system, your prerequisite should cover, because you are responsible for ensuring that the right thing is done and therefore it is not going to contaminate or jeopardize the safety of your product. Suitability of equipment. What kind of packaging equipment are you using? Where do you do that? Is it controlled environment? Is it vacuum packaging? Primary, secondary, do you need that kind of packaging? Or just a sack or a carton and then everything, bulk packaging, all is suitable. And then the lots identification, the traceability or the batch number. What constitutes a lot? What constitutes a batch? You should know all this. Is it a continuous production or batch production? That will inform you of the kind of equipment you should buy. How do you clean it? Accessibility of cleaning, maintenance, both preventive and corrective maintenance. How do you manage your purchase item, raw materials, ingredients, chemicals, the packaging materials, the supplies? How do you dispose of waste? What measures do you have in place for prevention of cross-contamination, cleaning and sanitizing measures? Cleaning is different from disinfection or something. Do you have what it takes to do the proper cleaning? How do you ensure pest control? Is it an integrated pest control, or you just bring people to fumigate your facility from time to time? Are they using EPA permitted fumigants or pesticide? Who is responsible for the hygiene of your staff? What are the protocols? If someone is ill, do you allow the person to handle foodstuff or get involved in the processing activities? These are all part and parcel of the PRPs, the prerequisite program, the conditions and activities to be carried out. And I said it should be suitable for your operation. Now, let's look at the principles that underpins Hasseb. In most cases, I have a flow chart to make it simple because this Hasseb thing can be very, very, very confusing. Here, there are 7 principles. This, you can note this thing now. There are 7 principles. By the implementation of the Hasseb food system involves 12 steps. Step 1 to 5 are what we call the foundation, the prerequisite steps, phases, where you prepare yourself to apply the principles. So the principle 1 starts at step 6 of your operation. So after you've done the 5 preliminaries, you come to the first principle. And the first principle says that we should conduct hazard analysis. Trust me, this is a very big challenge. Unless you've been in that area for a number of times, you work in a food safety. I'm talking about a formal food safety environment for a period. Then you'll be able to conduct this hazard analysis. Because you need to have a lot of information to be able to do this. Because identify potential hazard. Potential is not the obvious. So how do you determine whether it is potential? That's the ability to cause harm. Ability to affect your production negatively. And for each step, or the stage, point, I've mentioned that when they say step, critical control point, step, I said it can be a phase, it can be a stage in your production. And normally, you advise that you use a flow diagram. That is, you try to describe the process step by step, logically. And at each step of the process, you try to identify what may go wrong. Then you do the assessment by way of the likelihood of occurrence. Some may happen once a year, once a week, once in 3 months, once in 5 years. But the severity of that hazard is determined by the likelihood of occurrence and the degree of harm that it may cause. So when that is established, then you can prepare a preventive measure for control. You are not saying corrective measure, you say preventive. But the correction will come at the end of the process. That's when we are doing inspection and testing. The principle 2 would to take us to what? Step 7. It said, once you be able to identify those hazards, you determine or identify the critical control points. I'm saying critical because at that point, you should apply the brakes. That is the corrective action, the preventive action, the corrective measure, everything. The control measure, to be specific. That's the point. So you determine the point, and you come out with procedures in operational control systems to either eliminate, minimize that likelihood of occurrence or reduce the hazard to acceptable level. For instance, when you're talking about pesticide residue, the acceptable levels are the codex and the various product standards have defined the acceptable level. So you try to work, that's why I'm saying that you plan to achieve wholesome or safe products. You plan. Means that in the plan, you've identified the CCP and what to do in case there's any hazard present, how to reduce it to the acceptable level. Please, everything that you do, you should be able to control the processes. How do you do that? You should have a food safety team, well-informed team, to be able to implement some of these measures at the various steps. Principle number 3, once the CCPs have been identified or determined, then it's up to you to establish the critical limits. And here, there is a challenge. The theory will not give you the full benefit. So you should add a bit of practice to make your staff competent to be able to establish the critical limits. So you have your target levels and then you have the tolerance. Those of you who are using control charts, you see that the operational limits, the one that is feasible, the one that, because you shouldn't go beyond a certain limit. So you should be able to set the critical limit, which must be met, whether you like it or not, to ensure that that CCP is under control. And sometimes you might have to use a combination of control measures to be able to bring this critical control point under control. Here, when we say critical control points, you should be able to measure the parameter. Okay? And you should know the absolute limit. That's the tolerance or the safety limit for that particular control. So when we say that one, the temperature should not go beyond 65. You set your limit so that it will not go beyond 65. So if 65 is the maximum, it can be plus or minus, so that when you add a plus, you are on the borderline 65. The risk ones, like the micro ones, they will give you the small m and the big M. That is the minimum value and the maximum value, and you should operate, because when you go above the maximum, you're in big trouble because of the hazard level. Then you establish a system to monitor the target, the critical limits that you've established. And here you are talking about real-time monitoring. So you monitor the controls by testing or observation. Be careful, the testing will give you absolute measurable parameters. Observation may give you acceptable, not acceptable, okay, very subjective. So your monitoring system, you should think through it, and that's why I'm saying that it is not like some system fit for all. No. You do your own HACCP study analysis and come out with some of these monitoring control tools. So testing will be part, but the question is that how long will you take to do the test and come back and continue the production? So that's the challenge. So you have a way of doing some very basic but very relevant monitoring testing. When it comes to the micro, Salmonella, for instance, will not give you that result in a day. You have to wait for about 72 hours. So what happens if you have to push the consignment to the next level packaging? Some of the monitoring, like metal detection, you can do it instantly, and it all depends on the kind of system that you're having. Talking about the machinery and your operational tools and things like that. You can monitor pH instantly and determine whether you should continue the production or you should halt and do some correction or adjustment, because your aim is either eliminate or reduce it to acceptable limits. Then the principle 5, once you've been able to do the monitoring and have the results, you should put in place corrective action. And this is another challenge. The corrective action is a 3-stage thing. Halt it, correct it immediately, do your investigation, and come out with a corrective action plan. So, corrective action to be taken when monitoring indicates that a particular CCP is going out of control. So if you don't monitor, you will not be able to tell whether that critical control point is under control or out of control. So it's very important to do the principle 4, the monitoring. Corrective action procedures and responsibilities, very critical in HACCP food safety system. Reason is the procedure should be documented. In modern management system, we call it what? Documented information, so that whoever is on duty can have access, follow the procedure, and then correct it so that it will not complicate issues. And please define the role and responsibility. Who is doing the monitoring and who is supposed to implement the corrective action? Very critical. Principle 6, it said what? Establish procedure for verification. What is verification? Checking whether whatever measure that you put in place is working or it's not working. So verification is different from validation. Validation simply means, are you doing the right things? The answer is yes or no, you are doing the right things. But whatever you are doing, when it's affirmative, the answer is affirmative. Is it being done right? How do you check it? by verification. So you verify to confirm that the system is working effectively. Okay? And the verification procedure must be developed so that you can maintain the system to ensure that it will work effectively, not once, but all the time. So your Hasseb system needs verification, and you should have a verification procedure so that you'll be able to check whether you're having the desired results. If the tool, the system is not giving you the correct result, please go back and start the designing and all that again. Do proper hazard analysis, or I would like to put it Hasseb study. Come up with your Hasseb plan and follow the plan through to the end. Principle 7, establish a documentation system. So you establish a documentation, meaning you should have all the procedures. And when that procedure is rolled out, the record relating to that should be established and it should be maintained. So you cannot run away from your quality record. So some will say complaints, record it, because it will help you verify, check whether your system is giving you the desired result or not. The record must be kept to demonstrate that the Hasseb system is operating under control. Please, you do not correct records. Fine, you're entering the data, the measurements in a logbook. And instead of writing 3, you wrote 4. Please cross it out neatly and write 3. Don't use tippet. Don't try to erase it, because that will nullify the record. And the record should be what? In real time. I've been on audits where the production guy have the record sheets. You take about 10 records per shift. You will either use pencil or record the first one and then jump to the 5th hour or the 6th hour and asking, when are you going to populate or this record sheet? So when I finish work, I'll go to my office, and that is not allowed. It's not permissible. It should be real time. To train your staff to be able to put the record down. That is the Hasseb system. Otherwise, if there is a deviation from the critical limits, I've explained the critical limits, the appropriate correction action to be made. The question time, I expect that somebody will ask, how do you establish the critical limits? Please start thinking about it, because I expect you to ask that question, because it is very, very, very necessary. How do you establish the critical limits? 7 points, explain. So the 7 points will lead you to the step 12, that is the record keeping, the implementation steps. Hasseb is not a standalone system, please. It is part and parcel of an existing bigger picture, your hygiene practices and other things that you do. And one most important part is a strong management commitment. Strong management commitment. So when I'm conducting audit and I've not seen the establishment of the food safety or the Hasseb team sanctioned by and authorized by management, it's a no-go area. That means that management is not showing commitment towards the success, the establishment implementation of a Hasseb system that will give you that desired result. Wholesome food. Training is another essential requirement, because quality is a moving target. Almost every year, they are adding new things to the requirements. because science is evolving. Things that you said will not pose problem, now they are posing problem, especially viruses. Very difficult to control. Previously, our focus is on bacteria and maybe some parasite. Now we are talking about virus, and they are very dangerous. That is why your water quality is even good. So please, it is an aid. Develop specific training because we now understand the concept of Hasseb, so that your staff will be able to support the Hasseb plan. Otherwise, it's just a wish list. Make sure everybody's involved. They buy into this system. The procedures are well defined. The tasks and responsibility well defined. And sure that they are competent operational personnel at the various critical control points. Very essential, because the person should be trained to be able to monitor and see whether that point is under control or out of control. The implementation, we've spoken about the principle. Now, how do we implement? Hasseb implementation steps. I said it is a preventive food safety system. It does not rely on end product testing. So when you follow the 12 steps in a logical sequence, and the question is that, where do you find this? These guidelines could be found in the Codex document, Codex Alimentarius Commission. And they have a specific document that talks about food hygiene. Food hygiene. So you see the recommended steps in this. So please Google Codex Alimentarius Commission and look for this document, this code of practice, and it will help you implement your Hasseb food safety system. Now the steps. I mentioned earlier on that the implementation, you have 5 preliminary steps. Before you get to the first principle and run through the 7th principle, that will bring you to the last implementation step. What is the documentation and training? So you set up your team. That is why if management is not committed, that team will not be set up. These are preliminary steps. Step 2 means describe the product you should understand. And sometimes, the last meeting I told you to have the product specific standard, because in that standard, they will define the product. Is it high quality cassava flour? Is it industrial starch? Is it a fruit juice or a puree or a concentrate? Okay, is it a cream or bathing lotion or a pomade? Please, the product description. Very, very important. And this should be part and parcel of the Hasseb plan. What are you looking at in the plan? The product composition, the structure. Or you're talking about the chemistry. The processing condition, is it heat treated, pasteurized, sterilized, whatever. The packaging, because the product will determine the type of packaging. Is it compatible? Or do you start reacting because it is not the appropriate packaging material? Is it high density polyethylene bag or low density? Is it food grade or non-food grade? The storage conditions, the distribution systems, the shelf life, how long can it stay once open? Some will say consume once open or refrigerate once open. All those things should be part of the product description. If it's not there, you are not meeting the Hasseb requirements. Step 3, Identify the intended use. Is it ready to eat? Or is a semi-process, and therefore you continue the processing by heating, by frying, by baking, by roasting? Please, should be stated. Intended use. What is the target group? Is it for industrial catering, home, for senior citizens, for hospital, for infants? Please, these are regulatory requirements. If you don't put this thing there, you go to FDA for registration, you have issues. The challenges are bound to come because you fail to comply with this HACCP requirements. Then I said you should follow your processing flow diagram. That will help you identify the critical control points or the control points, and to put in place the suitable control measures. And please, there are several ways of doing that. And if it's not properly done, that means your HACCP study or the analysis was not properly done. It's not. So it should be in a sequence and present them in detail. At which point you add an additive? At which point you add water? At which point do you clarify or homogenize? At which point or at which temperature do you seal the bottle or the containers? These are the things that you, under which condition do you package? It's all part and parcel of the flow diagram. Please, I said, you may include the movement of raw material. At a certain point, the clean bottles or the receptacle should be ready to fill. Under which condition? Who is allowed to do that or permitted to carry out that activity? The equipment layout, the flow should be in a certain sequence, so there's no crisscrossing. The layout properly planned to facilitate easy cleaning. The principle of what? Clean as you go. As you generate the waste, it should be taken out of the production flow. At what point do you store? Under which temperature, humidity? All these things should be well labeled in the flow diagram. And then the step 5 means that once you've done that, which is theory, go onto the site physically, that is a practice, and check whether what you were dreaming of is actually the real thing. Because a lot of people copy flow diagrams because it looks beautiful, but is it okay for your patient? Even the arrangement of the equipment, is it the same? So please go onto the floor to confirm. We call it on-site confirmation of the flow diagram. These are all what preliminary step 5. Then you kickstart the implementation of the first principle, hazard analysis. It is a very, 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 if you like, challenging task. Assemble your team of different knowledge, skills, competence, so that you'll be able to pinpoint where the hazards are and even be able to classify whether they are biological, chemical, or physical, and whether they are reasonable. They are potential causes of harm. They are relevant to your operation. Because when you've done the study, you come out with 1,001, but you should be able to eliminate and focus only on the significant ones. And there are several ways of doing that. Okay? For instance, I'm giving you an example here, the use of air curtains, because your doors are open wide, you don't have trap doors, you don't have anything, so you have to put in those curtains just to prevent contamination from outside. Some institutions or factories, depend on how delicate the product and the target group is for infants. it's a ready to eat product, like the fruit juice, like the the squash. You don't have to cook, so you open and straight away you're drinking. So it will tell you the kind of systems you should put in. Whether there should be a food bath at the entrance, we call it hygiene junctions to the critical processing areas. You can never enter unless you are wearing your headgear. So these are the good manufacturing practices, the standard operating procedure that we put in place for controls at each point. So step 6 is very, very important. What are the sanitization standard operating procedures? Wash hands. Some will say use disposable paper towels. Some will say hot air. What type of hot air? There are several designs in terms of the equipment. It will all depend on what you do and the severity of the hazard. Sometimes, the step 7, to take decision, you have to use a tool called the decision tree. And most of them is a question that will demand yes or no answer. And that will tell you what to do and to say whether it is a critical control point or just a control point, or it's just a point that you can handle easily by a control measure. Please, it's very important. For instance, I'm giving you an example here. In the fruit juice production, you have to cover the pulp, especially pineapple, because as soon as then you see the fruit flies. Once it is crushed, it starts coming. So you cannot just pulp a whole big container, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, and leave it open. You have to cover it. And it's not an ordinary crop, just to pick from anywhere, which has been cleaned and sanitized to prevent infection by flies, especially mango, house flies, whether you like it or not, unless you have a very effective screen on your windows and openings, they will invade your production floor. So you do all these things to prevent cross-contamination. So there are several ways. Step 8, I said establish the critical limit. And most often you can get this in from literature, from food laws, food legislation, from standards. So that is why applying standards and making reference to the product standard very, very critical, so that you know the limits. 9, establish the monitoring system for each. So if you define and classify a step or a state as a critical control point, and you don't have a monitoring system in place, it's not acceptable. Not acceptable. Not acceptable. I say it 3 times. Once you identify that point or stage or phase as critical control point, you should establish a monitoring system. And it should come with all the procedures and how to determine whether it conforms the limit or not. Okay? Good. So it is very, very important, because that will help you to determine whether you are in control or out of control. 9, the program of observation, which is part of your monitoring system or measurement, should be properly identified at each critical point. And here in your protocol, your procedure, state who is to perform the monitoring and the checking, when to do that and how. Most often you are quick to say A is responsible, B is responsible, when, oh, our interval. But if you say how, then they start scratching their head. The how. How do you do the monitoring or the checking? Of which instrument? Is it a calibrator? Once it's a measuring device, calibration issues will come in. These are issues. Is the person trained and qualified to use that piece of equipment to do the checking or the monitoring? Please, very important. That is why earlier I said it will involve some attitudinal change. If you want to apply HACCP system, food safety system, the attitude should change. You come with scientific approach to issues. 10, I said establish a corrective action. Develop specific corrective action and document them in the HACCP plan for each CCP. So we have 5 critical control points. Each of them should have a corrective action plan. So in case of deviation, how to correct it and bring it back online. So you have the personnel responsible for implementing the corrective action. Actions required and action to be taken. And please, the level of authority. Because if you are not a supervisor or production manager, you cannot recommend either you discard or you rework. You have that authority to recommend that defective product should be reworked or should be discarded. Because at the time of detection that something went wrong, you quarantine all the batches within that period, do the proper investigation, and recommend either to discard or to rework. And you know, both of them will cost money. So very important. Verification. I've told you, do a lot of verification. What are some of the verification activities? Auditing. So we call it internal audits. And the people should be trained to conduct internal food safety audits. So the training will link to this. The HACCP plan review. Anytime you change your recipe or you introduce a new equipment, you should review your HACCP plan. The other one is what is called the random sampling and analysis. It means that you should have a sampling plan. And you should have verification plan. And what to do, what kind of analysis. Are you talking about microbiological status analysis or any physical or chemical analysis? It should be there. 12, which is the final step in the implementation. Please document and record. So documentation and record keeping is a must. What are some of the examples of records? The CCP monitoring record. So if your procedure says you should monitor on hourly basis and you are working 8 hours, you want to see the monitoring record for the 8-hour period. In the records of deviation, that means that you were not able to meet the critical limits. And they should come alongside the corrective action taken. A lot of records, complaints. What are the issues that we're complaining about? And there is a system that you also have to know what is called a recall or withdrawal, product recall or withdrawal. These are all records that you need to keep to demonstrate that the HACCP system is on point. Now, let's try to draw some conclusions from what we discussed so far. I said it looks for hazard. That is anything that could go wrong regarding food safety, implement controls, and ensure that the product will not cause harm. It is therefore very, very important for SMEs in the food processing business to apply the relevant product standard and use HACCP as a food safety tool If you're able to implement this and implement it well, HACCP will place you in a better position to export. And mind you, some jurisdiction, having a HACCP certificate is a prerequisite. No basic food safety system, no entry. They will not give you access to their market. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jamna, for this session. Such detailed HACCP presentation, taking us through the steps and all that we need to do, knowing the various principles and then the key things to do. I have learned a lot, and we thank you very much. I indicated earlier that the Q&A button was ready for questions to be uploaded. So we're still waiting for questions. Please, if you have any question on what to do, how to manage something, please, you put it there now so we can use the next 10 minutes for Fred to answer our questions and our clarifications for us. Thank you. Meanwhile, somebody asked earlier on about a question on certificate. Yes, this is an introduction bit, so we would not really be offering a certificate for participants. I think the real certificate will come when we delve into detail. Maybe if we have time to mount something more detailed into HACCP training, and then we can then give something now. But this is basically an introduction to HACCP for us to know the steps, the importance, and all that we need to do. Yes, so any more questions? Fred, if you have something to say, you can go ahead whilst we wait for questions.
Certification. The rule is simple. We take you through the introduction to HACCP, and it will come with a small quiz, a test. And
sure.
Once you pass the test, then you give you a certificate. Otherwise, you only qualify for certificate of attendance.
All right.
The reason is that after the intro, you do advanced HACCP, and you need that certificate of competence to be able to do the advanced HACCP. I said HACCP in detail is not, yes, crisscrossing, application of knowledge. That is what makes it a bit difficult. But when you do any site training, you will give you two. There are two people. Those who pass the quiz is very basic.
Okay, so Fred, now the one question. Somebody is asking whether a company can institute ISO 22000 without the full support of top management.
No. When we are doing the auditing is talking about some indicators of management commitment. And for instance, my first question from whoever is the CEO or the general manager, I'll know whether there's commitment or no commitment. I'll give you one instance. How often do you implement your training program? So without training, are you committed? Because you don't want to take your staff off the line to give them 1 hour. 2, I want to see your policy and objective. Like at least each technical staff will receive 3 hours or 6 hour training on HACCP. That is absent. It's not there in your policy. They are not committed. Simple things. The indicators are just obvious. And without that, that means you just want to implement it, the rationality just to please the regulator. That's all.
All right, thank you. Fred, there's another question. Say, how does Hasseb compare to the current food production and inspection programs?
Every food inspection program, one of the things they want to see is a food safety system. Okay? And even some buyers, especially those who buy large volumes, they'll give you a questionnaire. And one of the questions on that questionnaire is whether you are operating any food safety system.
Okay.
And if the answer is no, they'll say you come back tomorrow. Because they will do an audit.
Okay.
supplier audit. And the audit will be based on the system that you are operating on.
All right.
There's
Thank
no
you.
magic wand. It's very simple.
Okay. Well, somebody's asking about the next steps. Yes, the next steps is that whether are we willing to support establish? Yes, we are willing and ready to support you establish your systems.
Correct.
It depends on which sector you are. So we have our experts on the line. We have Frank for fruits. We have Na for cosmetics. We have Joseph Yeboah also for cassava and derivatives. Please speak to these experts if you know them. If you do not know them, you just drop your contacts here and we'll get in touch with you. So we are planning, we're going to get experts who are going to visit, we'll put them into clusters who will follow up and help you under the supervision of Fred to help you put in these systems. One of the hallmarks of WACOMP is to make sure quality becomes a household name. Yes, we want to have quality products all over. So yes, that is our response to that. So say if you are a small business with, let's say 4 staff, is it possible to go through all the stages and principles, or there's a simplified version?
You can go through.
You can go through.
It's a matter of defining the roles and responsibility very well. And you can rely on outside help, a company, a sister company who is implementing to help you. Look, I've supervised a company towards Hasseb, and there are only 3 key personnel. 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we've exhausted the questions. If you have another set, please, we have 5 minutes to wrap up. If you have any other question that is bothering on your mind, Fred has said yes, no matter the size, micro, because I think food safety doesn't know numbers, because when we are going to buy your food, we don't know whether you have 3 staff or 4 staff. All we need is that we have to buy food that is safe, it's clean food that will not make us sick, and we want to visit the shops again to pick your snack or your juice or whatever. Fred, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, closing remarks. In fact, I will urge each of you, especially SMEs, to demonstrate that you have what it takes to come out with wholesome products. And therefore, you have a system that you can manage well to realize that wholesome product. That is because if you want to go big, please do the right things and let them see that you are capable. The big orders will come. Once we are able to pass the supplier audit, the big orders will come. Because you build confidence in the consumer that you are capable of supplying, not once, but consistently, safe products.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Fred. I like a few words that you've said today. We talk about consistency in quality, consistency in production, and I like the closing remark. You say the big volumes will come, the big contracts will come. It's a matter of making sure we have consistency in quality and making sure that I think those of us who have also participated in the other programs that we've done earlier on the e-marketing, e-commerce bit, we always talk about referrals, so that when our products have the quality that it's required in the market, we'll get the necessary referrals, and then we would get people to come in and give us the orders that we need. On that note, we want to thank everybody so much for joining us. And then we will send a link. Please check next week. We will be here same time, 11 o'clock. We'll be talking about the quality management principles and then the benefits of ISO. We want to bring quality to our doorsteps. And as I said earlier on, please get in touch with Na Ache Nyakpo for cosmetics. Get in touch with Frank Kwesi for fruits, all our fruits people. And also for cassava derivatives, get in touch with Joseph Yeboah. We're compiling the list of companies that need support to be accompanied for hand-holding, for coaching purposes, for you to establish your quality standards, quality measures in place. And so please get in touch with them and let your name fall within, and then you hear from us going forward. On behalf of the WACOMP team, we want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been another educative session, and we thank you. Please visit our webpage and wacompghana.org, and then this material will be uploaded under trainings, under webinars. You find a video, you can listen to the training materials, the presentation would also be shared. Visit the website and then follow us also on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page, and then you get to hear a lot about us. Thank you very much for joining us. We're grateful, and then we meet hopefully next week, same time, talking about quality management. So Fred, on behalf of Fred and the entire WACOMP team, Ebe, who is behind the camera, we say thank you all, and then we meet next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.